I am Marin Montgomery, 18 years old. 3 days before freshman college orientation, my mother called my university bursar to steal my future. While I was sitting in the next room packing my dorm boxes, she told the financial aid office I was too unstable to manage my own affairs. She requested that my entire $120,000 educational trust be instantly rerouted into a joint parent account. She thought I was naive. She thought I was just a quiet teenager who would not ask questions. She had no idea that my late grandfather had installed a hidden failsafe in those documents, or that I had just captured her entire digital footprint. When my grandfather's former law partner called the school the morning of orientation, he delivered a message that stripped my parents of everything. Before I tell you exactly how they walked blindly into a federal trap, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Still Drama Stories. Only do this if you genuinely want to hear how this ends. And if you are watching right now, drop a comment telling me your age, where you are from, and what time it is there. Now let me take you back to a Tuesday afternoon in Wilmington, Delaware, the exact moment the breach began. The air conditioning in our house was humming low, masking the sound of a voice drifting from the home office. I was kneeling on the carpet behind the living room sofa, running a diagnostic scan on the family router. The network had been dropping packets all morning, and I needed a stable connection to submit my final housing forms for my cybersecurity degree. Through the thin drywall, my mother Linda spoke into her headset. Her tone carried the polished artificial concern she usually saved for country club luncheons. "We feel it is best to route the surplus scholarship funds and the upcoming trust disbursements directly into our parent account," she said. I heard the faint clink of ice shifting in her glass. Marin is a bright girl, but she is still far too young to handle those kinds of sums. As her parents, we will manage her tuition money moving forward. My hand stopped hovering over the Ethernet port. She was talking to the bursar. This was not a conversation about weekly allowances. Linda was negotiating the theft of a trust my grandfather had established strictly in my name. That money represented my only path to a degree shielded by strict layers of Delaware estate law. Most teenagers would have kicked the door open. They would have demanded answers, caused a scene, and let the betrayal burn out in a loud confrontation. But in my chosen field, the moment you alert an intruder to your presence, they cover their tracks. You do not shout at a security breach. You monitor the intrusion map, the lateral movement, and prepare the patch. I pulled my phone from my pocket and logged into the router administrative dashboard. I isolated the active voice communication session, recorded the destination IP address, and captured a screenshot of the exact timestamp. The digital clock read 2:14 in the afternoon. Rising to my feet, I dusted off my knees and walked silently past the closed office door. Inside my bedroom, empty cardboard boxes lined the floor. I picked up a stack of sweaters, folding them flat, and pressing them into the corners of the nearest box. My pulse remained steady. The anger existed, but it felt cold and compressed into a tight, manageable knot resting just beneath my ribs. My parents believed they could bypass my grandfather's legacy through a single phone call. They assumed my quiet nature meant I was blind. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began establishing a secure digital perimeter. They were trying to take my future, which meant they needed liquid capital fast. And in this house, sudden financial desperation always pointed directly toward one specific person. My brother Kyle is 24 years old. In the Montgomery household, he occupies a tier of existence distinct from mine. He is the firstborn son, the charismatic high school athlete, the heir apparent to whatever imaginary dynasty my father believes we represent. 2 years ago, Kyle launched a tech startup. He secured venture capital through my father's country club connections, rented a sleek office space in downtown Wilmington, and hired a team of designers before he even had a viable product. The company went bankrupt last month. He burned through 7 figures of investor capital and accumulated a personal debt load that would sink most ordinary families. Yet in our house, failure is never treated as a consequence of Kyle's actions. It is reframed as a learning opportunity, a temporary setback orchestrated by jealous competitors and an unpredictable market. My father, Greg, is a man who measures human worth entirely by outward appearance and social standing. He drives a leased German sedan, wears bespoke suits, and serves on the board of 3 local charities. His greatest fear is not financial ruin itself, but the public exposure of financial ruin. If his country club peers discovered that his golden son had defaulted on 6-figure loans, the shame would shatter the fragile ecosystem of prestige my father has spent decades cultivating. To Greg, image is equity, and right now his equity is in free fall. The truth of their desperation materialized during dinner 3 nights before I intercepted the bursar call. We sat around the mahogany dining table, the air heavy with the smell of roasted chicken and unspoken panic. Kyle sat across from me, swirling expensive red wine in his crystal glass. He did not look like a man facing financial devastation. He wore a crisp linen shirt and carried himself with the unbothered ease of someone who always expects a safety net to catch him when he stumbles. Dad leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished wood. He offered Kyle a reassuring, confident smile. "The market is just volatile right now," Greg said, cutting a piece of chicken with precise movements. "Investors get skittish over nothing. We will secure bridge financing and have you back on top by the 3rd quarter. You just need to weather this temporary storm." Linda nodded in agreement, reaching out to gently pat Kyle's hand. "You are a visionary, sweetheart. Visionaries always face early obstacles. The great ones never let minor setbacks define their journey." I sat at the far end of the table, quietly eating my green beans. I understood the subtext hidden beneath their encouraging words. There was no bridge financing coming. Traditional banks do not lend to failed founders with ruined credit and zero collateral. My parents were exhausting their own liquidity, trying to float Kyle's sinking ship, draining their retirement savings to prevent his aggressive creditors from filing public lawsuits that would ruin the family name. Then my father turned his attention to me. The warmth drained from his face, replaced by a calculating, businesslike demeanor. "Marin," he said, resting his fork on his plate, "your mother and I have been reviewing the household budget today. As you know, the economy is presenting some unexpected hurdles for the family right now. We need everyone to pitch in and make smart, conservative choices." I set my glass of water down on a coaster. I felt the familiar chill of dread creeping up my spine. I knew exactly what was coming next. Greg folded his hands together. "We think it would be wise for you to consider deferring your enrollment at the university for a year. The local community college has excellent introductory courses. You could live at home, help us endure a tight quarter, and transfer those credits later. It is the responsible choice for the family." The responsible choice. I looked at the 3 of them sitting under the warm glow of the chandelier, my brother sipping his expensive wine while drowning in a sea of bad loans. My mother nodding solemnly as if suggesting I abandon my cybersecurity program was a noble patriotic sacrifice, and my father asking me to surrender my future to fund a mirage. They were not asking me to be responsible. They were asking me to be collateral damage. I did not argue. I did not throw my napkin on the table or point out the glaring hypocrisy of the situation. I simply looked at my father, maintaining a neutral expression, and delivered a simple fact. "The trust pays my tuition, Dad. It does not cost the family anything for me to attend the university this fall." A brief, sharp silence fell over the room. Greg shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening so hard I could see the muscle twitch. The mention of the trust always triggered a specific bitter resentment in him. My grandfather was a shrewd estate lawyer who understood the precise architecture of our family dynamics. Before he passed away 4 years ago, he witnessed Greg funneling money into Kyle's endless string of failed hobbies. He saw my mother enabling the golden child while consistently ignoring my achievements. Grandpa saw the writing on the wall. He knew that if he left his wealth to his son, it would be squandered on vanity projects. He bypassed Greg entirely. He established an educational trust designated solely for my use, explicitly locking the funds away from my father's reach. He structured the documents with the cold, meticulous precision. Delaware law is famous for ensuring that my future could never be liquidated to cover my brother's mistakes. Or so we all believed. At the dinner table, Linda offered a tight, patronizing smile to fill the heavy silence. "We are just looking at the big picture, Marin. We want what is best for everyone. We will discuss it more later when you are feeling less defensive." That dinner was the pebble that triggered the avalanche. 3 days later, I was kneeling behind the sofa, listening to my mother tell the bursar that she and Greg would be managing my tuition money moving forward. The puzzle pieces snapped into place with terrifying mathematical clarity. They were not asking me to defer enrollment out of an abundance of caution. They needed me to defer because dropping my enrollment would trigger a full refund of the prepaid fall semester tuition. If they could intercept that refund and route the incoming trust disbursements into a joint parent account, they would have immediate access to $120,000 in liquid cash. They were not trying to manage my money. They were actively conspiring to steal it. They planned to quietly drain my entire college fund to pay off Kyle's business creditors. They intended to save my brother from the consequences of his own arrogance by sacrificing my education, my career, and my independence. Once the money was gone, they would simply claim it was a necessary family loan that they would eventually repay. They would trap me at home attending community college while Kyle continued to play the role of the successful entrepreneur on my dime. Sitting in my bedroom surrounded by half-packed moving boxes, the reality of their scheme settled over me like a heavy winter chill. They viewed me as an asset to be harvested. My grandfather had built a legal fortress to protect me, but a fortress is only secure if the gates remain locked. My parents were attempting to pick the lock from the inside, using my youth and presumed obedience as their skeleton key. In the world of network security, recognizing the underlying motive behind a cyber attack is the first crucial step toward neutralizing the threat. Hackers do not break into secure servers for the thrill of it. They break in for the data, the payload, the payout. My parents were executing a sophisticated social engineering hack on my life. I needed to know exactly how far they had progressed in their scheme. A phone call to the bursar was just verbal maneuvering. To actually redirect a trust payout of that size, they would need a robust paper trail, official bank authorizations, and direct communication with the wealth management firm holding the principal balance. They would have to leave a digital footprint somewhere. Our house shared a central desktop computer in the study, a machine Greg used for his charity board work, and Linda used for household logistics. It was the central node of their daily operations. If they were communicating with the university or the bank, the evidence would be cached on that hard drive. I waited until 9 o'clock that evening. Greg and Linda were in the living room watching television with Kyle laughing at a sitcom. The house had settled into its usual relaxed evening rhythm. I slipped down the hallway, pushed open the door to the study, and sat down at the glowing monitor. I cracked my knuckles, opened a secure command terminal, and went to work hunting for the invisible trails they thought they had hidden. The study was dark, except for the sharp blue glow of the desktop monitor illuminating the walls. Down the hallway, the muffled track of a television sitcom provided a steady rhythm of canned laughter. Greg and Linda were relaxed in the living room, celebrating the illusion of their perfect family. I sat in my father's leather desk chair and placed my hands on the keyboard. My father is a man who builds his life around outward prestige, but possesses zero understanding of digital hygiene. He views the internet as a convenience rather than a landscape of vulnerabilities. His login password was a combination of his birth year and his country club zip code. He left his primary email client open and running in the background. I did not need to hire a private investigator to uncover their sabotage. Cybersecurity is not about cinematic hacking or typing furiously in a dark room. It is a slow, methodical exercise in reading the trails people leave behind. People are arrogant. They assume their private actions vanish the moment they close a browser window. But machines have perfect memories. I bypassed the standard folders and went straight into the temporary cache and the deleted items bin. I extracted recovering files and sorted them by timestamp, matching the exact dates following Kyle's business collapse. To build a successful digital defense, you must anticipate how the adversary thinks. Greg and Linda were not sophisticated adversaries, but they were desperate ones. Desperation breeds carelessness. The breadcrumbs appeared immediately. My parents were leaving a digital paper trail so obvious it felt almost insulting. The first piece of evidence was an unencrypted email thread between Greg and a boutique wealth management firm based out of a strip mall in Dover. The firm catered to clients desperate for high-risk, high-reward maneuvers. Greg had sent them inquiries about expediting wire transfers and bypassing standard escrow holds. Attached to these emails were files titled Delaware Trust Dissolution Protocol. I opened the documents. The Delaware Trust system is designed to be impenetrable to outside creditors. My grandfather utilized a generation-skipping transfer structure. He knew Greg would eventually face financial ruin, so he built a wall around my inheritance. To breach that wall, Greg needed a sledgehammer. The forms on the screen detailed a legal process known as an emergency medical decanting. My grandfather had built his trust with specific fail-safes preventing early withdrawal. To access the principal balance, an executor needed to prove a catastrophic change in circumstances. The forms highlighted clauses related to medical emergencies and incapacitation. A cold shiver worked its way down my arms. They were researching how to break the legal seal on the money by claiming an emergency. But physical emergencies require hospital records and doctor's notes. You cannot fake a broken spine or a sudden illness without a medical professional verifying the claim. I kept digging. I navigated to Greg's drafted emails folder. People often use drafts as a digital notepad, writing out their thoughts before they have the nerve to hit send. There was an unsent message dated yesterday addressed to the University Director of Admissions and the Financial Aid Office. The subject line read, "Urgent Status Update regarding Marin Montgomery Fall enrollment." I clicked the draft. The text on the screen laid out a narrative so vicious it made my stomach drop. "To whom it may concern, it is with deep regret that we must inform you, our daughter Marin will be deferring her enrollment for the upcoming academic year." Over the past few weeks, Marin has suffered a severe mental health crisis. Following the advice of our family counselors, we are keeping her at home for intense psychiatric monitoring. She is not in a state of mind to manage her academic schedule or her financial obligations. As her parents, we are assuming full control of her affairs to ensure her well-being. Please process the immediate refund of her prepaid tuition and direct all future correspondence to our primary accounts. I read the words again. Severe mental health crisis, intense psychiatric monitoring. The screen blurred for a fraction of a second. The betrayal bypassed my logic centers and hit me straight in the chest. A father is supposed to protect his daughter from the world. My father was actively constructing a narrative to destroy my reputation before my adult life even began. The betrayal was not just financial anymore. It was character assassination. They were not just stealing my grandfather's money. They were weaponizing my mental health to do it. All my life, I have been the quiet one. I preferred the hum of a computer server to the loud, chaotic energy of Kyle's athletic events. I spent my weekends writing code and reading network architecture manuals instead of attending neighborhood parties. My parents always treated my introversion as a social defect. Now they were twisting my quiet nature into a fabricated psychiatric emergency. They planned to frame me as broken and unstable to the university administration. They would use this false diagnosis to legally justify liquidating my trust fund and rerouting the tuition refund. Once the money hit their joint account, they would transfer it directly to Kyle's creditors. If I ever tried to report the theft later, they would simply point to their own forged emails claiming I was delusional and unfit to manage my own life. A father was willing to smear his daughter's sanity across a permanent academic record just to protect his favored son from bankruptcy. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Crying is a biological response to pain, but it does not solve the problem. I took a deep, slow breath, counting the seconds. I released it. I could not afford the luxury of a breakdown. I closed my eyes and focused on the steady hum of the computer tower beneath the desk. I visualized the network packets moving through the router. I channeled the hurt into a sharp clinical focus. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small titanium flash drive. I inserted it into the universal serial bus port and initiated a secure encrypted transfer protocol. I did not just copy the emails. I extracted the metadata. I pulled the Internet Protocol routing logs, the creation timestamps, and the session identifiers. I grabbed the digital signatures, proving these documents were generated from Greg's specific user account on his specific machine on our home network. In legal terms, a printed email is just text, but metadata is undeniable forensic evidence. It proves exactly who was sitting at the keyboard and when they pressed the keys. I turned their sloppy, desperate plotting into a concrete chain of custody. The progress bar filled with green light moving steadily across the screen. I watched the files duplicate into my encrypted vault. Every downloaded form, every drafted lie, every desperate message to the Dover wealth management firm was now safely locked behind a military-grade encryption key that only I possessed. I verified the checksums, ensuring the data integrity was perfect. If this ever saw the inside of a courtroom, I would have the forensic high ground. The transfer completed. I safely ejected the drive and slipped it back into my pocket. I cleared the recent activity cache, restored the machine to its exact previous state, and turned off the monitor. The study plunged back into darkness. I stood up and prepared to walk back to my bedroom, but as I turned, my hip brushed against the edge of the heavy oak desk. My gaze shifted to the leather pen cup sitting next to the keyboard. Something was missing. The trust dissolution forms required official authorization. A digital email draft could initiate the refund process, but releasing the escrow funds from the bank demanded ink on paper. I had turned 18 last week, meaning my parents no longer possessed automatic legal authority over my signature. They could not just sign my name on a standard parental proxy form anymore. I looked at the empty space in the pen cup. My grandfather had given me a distinct blue fountain pen for my high school graduation. I kept it in this exact cup on this exact desk. It was the only pen in the house that wrote with that specific shade of indigo ink. The cup was empty. A new layer of dread washed over me. An email claiming a mental health crisis was just the diversion. To actually touch the money, they needed my legal consent. If I was not going to give it, they were preparing to take it. I realized with chilling certainty that the digital trail was only half of their scheme. The physical evidence was somewhere in this house, and I needed to find it before the sun came up. I stood in the dark study, staring at the empty leather cup on my father's desk. My grandfather gave me that specific fountain pen on my 16th birthday. It was a heavy brass instrument filled with custom indigo ink. He told me that in Delaware, a signature carries the weight of a person's entire reputation. You do not sign a contract lightly, he would say. You read every single line because the ink binds you to the terms. Now my custom ink was missing from my room. An email draft claiming a mental health crisis was just a diversion. To actually redirect the trust funds and release the escrow money from the bank, my parents needed my legal consent. Since I turned 18 last week, they no longer possessed automatic parental authority over my signature. If I was not going to give them my consent, they were clearly preparing to take it. I realized with chilling certainty that the digital trail was only half of their scheme. The physical evidence was somewhere in this house, and I needed to find it. 2 days later, an opportunity finally presented itself. It was a Friday evening, and my parents were taking Kyle to an upscale steakhouse downtown to celebrate his 24th birthday. I declined the invitation, citing a severe migraine. My mother did not press the issue. She offered a tight smile and told me to rest. She preferred my absence anyway. A family dinner meant photo opportunities, and my plain presence always ruined her curated social media aesthetic. I listened from my bedroom window as my father backed his leased sedan out of the driveway. The engine noise faded down the suburban street, leaving the house in total silence. I had roughly 2 hours before they returned. I moved back into the study. A digital intrusion leaves metadata, but a physical search leaves disturbed dust, shifted papers, and microscopic tells. If I alerted them that I knew about the physical documents, they would destroy the evidence and find another way to corner me. I walked to my bathroom and put on a pair of tight latex gloves from my first aid kit. I did not want my fingerprints on anything they might later submit to a bank official. Cybersecurity principles translate perfectly to the physical world. You must leave the environment exactly as you found it. I started the search with my mother's desk. Linda is a woman who organizes her life through careful aesthetics. Her workspace was pristine. I checked her shallow drawers, sliding them open inch by inch to avoid making a sound. I found nothing but monogram stationery and spare reading glasses. I moved across the room to Greg's desk. My father is disorganized but highly secretive. He locks his lower filing cabinet, but he keeps the spare key taped underneath his heavy mahogany paper tray. I reached under the tray, felt the small metal key, and slid it into the lock. The mechanism turned with a soft click. Inside the bottom drawer lay a thick stack of manila folders. I sifted through them carefully, lifting each tab without disturbing the overall alignment. I saw mortgage statements, credit card bills, and past due notices from Kyle's venture capital creditors. Then near the very back of the drawer, I found a thick beige envelope sealed with a black binder clip. I unfastened the clip and pulled out the contents. The paper was crisp, heavy bond legal stock. It was the exact kind of paper lawyers use for binding corporate resolutions. The title at the top of the first page read, "Durable Power of Attorney." My eyes scanned the dense legal paragraphs. The text granted Greg and Linda Montgomery unrestricted authority over my financial accounts, my educational records, and my medical decisions. It was a total legal surrender. The document stated that due to my diminished capacity, I was willfully transferring all my adult rights back to my parents. I turned to the final page. There at the bottom on the signature line rested my name, Marin Elizabeth Montgomery. The ink was a deep, unmistakable indigo. The strokes were practically flawless. Linda had spent hours practicing the loop of my capital letters and the sharp crossing of my T. She had stolen my grandfather's pen to make the forgery look undeniably authentic. A sudden wave of panic constricted my throat. The room felt small and deprived of oxygen. The digital drafts I found earlier were just ideas, but this document was a loaded weapon. If they handed this crisp paper to a bank manager, I would cease to exist as an independent adult. I would become a legal ward of the very people trying to drain my future. My autonomy was hanging by a single forged thread. I forced myself to breathe. I inhaled for 4 seconds, held it for 4 seconds, and exhaled for 4. My grandfather used to take me to his law office on weekends when I was little. While he drafted wills and estate plans, he would teach me the mechanics of evidence. In Delaware, he said a document is only as strong as its chain of custody. You must prove exactly where it was found when it was found and who possessed it. A forged signature is a serious crime, but without proof of context, it devolves into a simple argument of conflicting stories. I needed undeniable context. I stepped out of the study and walked down the hall to the kitchen. I picked up the morning edition of the local Wilmington newspaper, sitting on the counter. I brought it back to the desk. Next, I retrieved a small digital clock from the guest bedroom, one that clearly displayed the current date and the time in bright red numerals. I arranged the crisp legal document on the center of the desk under the desk lamp. I placed the daily newspaper directly beside the forged signature line. I positioned the digital clock right above the paperwork. I took out my phone and disabled the flash. I snapped a series of high-resolution photographs. I captured the wide angle showing the entire desk, the newspaper, the clock, and the power of attorney form. Then I moved in closer. I took macro shots focusing tightly on the indigo ink, highlighting the slight hesitations in the pen strokes where Linda had paused to check her reference material. A professional forensic examiner would spot those tiny pools of ink instantly. My grandfather's pen was heavy, and it flowed differently than a standard ballpoint. Linda did not know how to maintain the correct pressure. The physical evidence of her crime was irrefutable. I reviewed the images on my phone screen, ensuring every single detail was sharp and legible. Then I uploaded the photos to my encrypted cloud server, hiding them behind the same military-grade firewall, securing the digital metadata I extracted days ago. Once the upload confirmed, I began the meticulous process of erasing my physical presence. I returned the digital clock to the guest room nightstand. I placed the newspaper back on the kitchen island, exactly where my father had discarded it that morning. I slid the forged document back into the beige envelope, fastened the binder clip, and placed it in the exact back corner of the filing cabinet. I locked the drawer and taped the small metal key back under the mahogany tray. I peeled off the latex gloves and walked outside to throw them deep into the outdoor trash bin, hidden under a pile of yard waste. I walked back into my bedroom and sat on the edge of my mattress. My heart beat with a slow, steady rhythm. I had the digital trails, and I had the physical proof. I knew their entire plan. But living in this house was rapidly becoming a psychological minefield. Downstairs, the front door unlocked. Loud laughter echoed in the foyer. Kyle was boasting about his expensive steak while Linda cooed over his birthday dessert. They were home. I lay back on my pillows and stared at the dark ceiling, knowing I had to wake up tomorrow and smile at the people who had just forged my legal death warrant. The hardest part of discovering a profound betrayal is not the initial shock. The true test of endurance is waking up the next morning, walking down the stairs, and sitting at the same breakfast table with the people who orchestrated it. You must arrange your features into a mask of perfect ignorance. You must pour your cereal knot at their mundane jokes and swallow the bitter reality rising in your throat. Saturday morning sunlight filtered through the kitchen blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing above the granite island. The smell of roasted coffee filled the room, a comforting domestic scent that felt entirely out of place. My mother stood by the counter, pouring orange juice into tall crystal glasses. I watched her manicured hands tilt the pitcher, noting the precise movement of her fingers. Those were the exact same fingers that had spent hours tracing my signature in deep indigo ink. She slid a glass toward me with a bright maternal smile that reached her mouth but left her eyes cold. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said. "Did your migraine finally pass?" "Yes, Mom," I replied, keeping my vocal register light and untroubled. "I feel much better today." I picked up the glass and took a slow sip. The sweet citrus tasted like ash on my tongue. Greg sat at the head of the dining table reading financial news on his tablet. He wore his favorite weekend cashmere sweater, looking the picture of a relaxed, successful patriarch holding his domain together. Kyle stumbled into the kitchen a few minutes later, complaining about a lingering hangover from his lavish birthday dinner. Greg merely chuckled, sliding a plate of buttered toast toward his favored son with easy affection. I sat there silently, a ghost in my own house. I understood now that confronting them would be a tactical disaster. If I slammed my fist on the table and revealed what I knew, the trap would spring far too early. Greg would deny everything with practiced corporate indignation. Linda would cry and claim she was only preparing contingency paperwork just in case my mental health declined further. They would shred the forged power of attorney, wipe the computer hard drive clean, and lock me out of the house before I could secure my belongings. I had to adhere to the strict discipline of silence. I had to hold the detonator steady, hiding it behind the facade of a naive, obedient daughter, until the exact right moment. That afternoon, the psychological warfare escalated from the kitchen table to a retail store. Linda insisted we go shopping for my college dorm supplies. She drove us to a sprawling big-box retailer on the edge of town, chattering the entire way about color schemes and space-saving hangers. The sheer audacity of her performance was breathtaking. She navigated the crowded aisles with a red shopping cart, tossing items into the basket while playing the role of a bittersweet mother preparing to send her youngest child off to adulthood. We reached the bedding aisle. I reached for a set of high-quality cotton sheets, the kind that might actually survive a year of industrial dorm laundry machines. Linda gently pushed my hand away with a soft, patronizing tut. "Let us be practical, Marin," she said, picking up a stiff, scratchy polyester blend wrapped in cheap plastic. "These are on clearance. You do not need luxury linens for a tiny twin bed. We are trying to be mindful of the budget right now, remember?" I looked at the yellow clearance sticker. I looked at the woman holding it. She was haggling over $30 for bedsheets while actively executing a plot to steal $120,000 from my trust fund. Furthermore, she was buying me sheets for a residential housing contract she was simultaneously attempting to cancel. The cognitive dissonance was dizzying. She wanted the visual evidence of a shopping trip. She wanted the physical receipts to prove she was fulfilling her maternal duties, building a cover story, just in case anyone ever questioned her devotion after the money vanished. "You are right, Mom," I said, keeping my gaze level and bright. "These are perfect. Thank you for thinking of the budget." She patted my cheek with a fond sigh. "That is my sensible girl." The drive home tested every ounce of my self-control. I stared out the passenger window, watching the familiar Delaware landscape blur past the glass. My fingernails dug into the fabric of my jeans, leaving deep crescent moon indentations in my palms. I channeled the intense frustration into mental focus, reviewing the encrypted files I had stored on my secure drive. I reminded myself that the polyester sheets sitting in the trunk were nothing more than props in a theatrical play that was about to be canceled. Sunday brought a different flavor of mundane cruelty. I spent the morning in my bedroom, methodically packing my belongings into cardboard boxes. I folded my clothes with military precision, wrapping my desk lamp in old shirts and stacking my cybersecurity textbooks by weight. Packing is usually an act of transition, a hopeful physical movement toward a new chapter of independence. For me, it became a profound exercise in psychological endurance. I was packing for a destination my parents were secretly trying to erase from the map. Greg walked by my open door, holding a mug of black coffee. He paused, leaning against the wooden door frame, watching me tape a medium-sized box shut. He offered a warm, proud smile that failed to reach his calculating eyes. "Almost done?" he asked, taking a slow sip from his ceramic mug. "Just finishing the last few boxes," Dad, I said, running a permanent marker across the cardboard to label the contents. "I know we have been focused on Kyle recently," Greg said, his voice dropping into a register of fake intimacy. "But I want you to know how proud I am of you. You are so independent, Marin, so low maintenance. It is a relief to know you have your head on straight. You always make things so easy for this family." I stopped wrapping a power cord and looked up at him. The words were meant to sound like a fatherly compliment, but they were actually a damning indictment. Low maintenance, easy. In his corporate vocabulary, those words translated to expendable. He was proud of me because he believed I was too docile to fight back. He assumed I would quietly step aside and let him harvest my future to fertilize Kyle's failures. He needed to believe I was a background character in his own personal drama, someone who would graciously accept defeat to maintain the illusion of his perfect life. "Thank you, Dad," I replied, giving him exactly the docile smile he expected to see. "I'm just trying to do my part." "That is my girl," he said, tapping the doorframe twice before walking away to check on his prize son. I sat on the floor, surrounded by cardboard and packing tape, the silence of the room pressing in around me. Living under this roof had become a masterclass in emotional compartmentalization. I had to sever my connection to these people in order to survive them. Every meal we shared, every casual conversation in the hallway, every forced smile added another heavy brick to the wall I was building between us. I was no longer a daughter interacting with her parents. I was an auditor observing a hostile entity from the inside. As the sun dipped below the tree line outside my window, the reality of my timeline settled in. Freshman orientation was approaching with terrifying speed. I had gathered the digital metadata proving their intent to commit fraud. I had secured the photographic evidence of the forged power of attorney. I possessed the raw materials required to expose their scheme to the authorities. However, possessing evidence is not the same thing as possessing power. If I simply walked into the university administrative office and handed them a flash drive, it would trigger a chaotic internal review. Greg would hire expensive lawyers to bury the administration in red tape. He would utilize his country club connections to paint me as a troubled, rebellious teenager fabricating evidence out of spite. The university might freeze the account temporarily, but the ensuing legal battle would drag on for months, effectively ruining my freshman year and leaving my academic status in limbo. I could not fight a man like Greg on my own. I needed leverage that superseded his local influence. I needed a structural failsafe that operated entirely outside his sphere of control. I pulled my grandfather's original trust documents from their hiding place inside the hollowed-out spine of an old dictionary on my bookshelf. I sat on my bare mattress and spread the thick, crinkling pages across my lap. My grandfather had anticipated Greg's greed long before I ever recognized it. He knew his son possessed a fundamental lack of integrity. As I read through the dense, archaic legal clauses tracing the lines of text with my index finger, I searched for the mechanism my grandfather must have left behind. Delaware trust law is famous for its intricate protections, its unique ability to lock assets away from predatory hands. There had to be a lock, and more importantly, there had to be an independent key holder. I flipped to the section detailing the conditions of emergency disbursement. I read the fine print, analyzing the microscopic legal parameters, dictating how and when the funds could be redirected before my 21st birthday. And there, buried deep in a subsection regarding fiduciary oversight, I found the name that would change the trajectory of my entire life. The realization washed over me a clean, cold wave of vindication. I finally knew exactly who I needed to call. The thick pages of my grandfather's trust document rested heavy across my lap. The paper bore a subtle watermark, a hallmark of premium legal stationery used by the most established law firms in the state. In the world of cybersecurity, we view a system architecture not just as a collection of wires and servers, but as a set of rules. A well-designed network anticipates the exact moment an intruder will attempt to bypass the outer gates. My grandfather approached estate law with the same exact philosophy. He did not just draft a financial agreement. He wrote an impenetrable algorithm running on the operating system of Delaware corporate law. I scanned the dense paragraphs detailing the emergency disbursement protocols. Standard legal trusts often hand over the keys the moment a beneficiary reaches their 18th birthday. My parents clearly believed that my recent entry into legal adulthood marked the finish line of their long con. They assumed that because I was 18, they could forge my consent claim a psychiatric emergency and drain the accounts without triggering any external alarms. They failed to understand that my grandfather knew his son better than anyone. He knew Greg was impatient, entitled, and prone to taking disastrous shortcuts. He recognized that turning 18 does not magically grant a person immunity from intense parental pressure or financial manipulation. To combat this, my grandfather coded a strict failsafe deep into the bedrock of the contract. Buried in Section 7 under the rigid stipulations for medical decanting, I found the lock. The text mandated that until I reached 21 years of age, any fundamental alteration to the trust structure requires a secondary authorization. An 18th birthday granted me access to tuition payments, but any emergency liquidation required a dual signature. It demanded a designated fiduciary co-signer. I traced my index finger across the crisp page and found the name printed in bold ink, Victor Caldwell. The name brought an immediate rush of clarity. Victor was my grandfather's former law partner. He was a titan operating in the upper echelons of the Wilmington legal district. I remembered him vividly from childhood holiday parties and weekend visits to my grandfather's office. Victor was a tall, imposing man with slate-gray hair and a gaze that felt like a polygraph test. While my father spent his weekends schmoozing at golf courses trying to look wealthy, Victor was the man who actually held the structural power. He drafted holding companies for regional shipping tycoons and shielded generational wealth from greedy heirs. Victor operated with a cold, ruthless precision. He was a man untethered to emotional manipulation. He had zero tolerance for fools and even less tolerance for thieves. My grandfather chose him because Victor would never bow to Greg's charismatic facade. My parents had entirely overlooked this critical detail. Greg always resented Victor because Victor saw right through his country club posturing. I realized Greg probably skimmed the trust documents years ago, saw that the primary ownership transferred at age 18, and simply stopped reading. He underestimated the meticulous nature of a seasoned estate lawyer. Greg thought he was playing a simple game of checkers, while my grandfather had arranged a masterclass in chess. Holding the forged power of attorney and the digital metadata provided a solid foundation. But walking into a police station or a university administrative office alone would be a tactical error. The authorities would see a teenager presenting a complex family dispute. Greg would hire expensive defense attorneys to muddy the waters and drag the process out for months. I needed an authority figure who could wield my evidence like a sword. I needed a proxy who commanded instant, undeniable respect in the exact arenas where my father pretended to have influence. I needed Victor to spring the trap. I could not just call his office and leave a casual message with a receptionist. I needed to bypass the gatekeepers and speak directly to the architect of the trust. I opened my laptop and booted into a secure operating system running off a hidden partition. I routed my internet connection through a secure server to mask my origin point. I found Victor's direct professional email address listed on the State Bar Association registry. I drafted the message using the hybrid language of a cybersecurity student and a legal heir. I did not write a desperate emotional plea for help. Emotional appeals are easily dismissed by busy professionals. I wrote a localized threat report. The subject line read, "Urgent, confidential, imminent breach of fiduciary duty regarding Montgomery Trust." I addressed him formally. I stated that unauthorized individuals were currently attempting a fraudulent medical decanting to liquidate the principal balance of the educational fund. I confirmed I possessed time-stamped metadata network logs and photographic evidence of forged legal instruments. I explained that the perpetrators were planning to execute the final phase of their fraud prior to my freshman orientation later this week. I requested an emergency meeting to deploy countermeasures and secure the assets. To ensure he understood the gravity of the situation, I attached a single heavily encrypted file. It contained a low-resolution cropped image of the forged signature from the power of attorney document, focusing specifically on the inconsistent ink pressure. I pressed send. The transmission took less than a second. I closed the laptop and slid it under my mattress. The house remained hauntingly quiet. Downstairs, the television droned on with the evening news broadcast. Kyle was pacing in the kitchen, complaining loudly about a minor scratch on his expensive sports car. Linda was chopping vegetables for dinner, offering Kyle empty platitudes about how they would get it fixed right away. The contrast was entirely surreal. They were living in a fragile bubble of impending wealth, entirely unaware that I had just launched a guided missile directly at their foundation. I walked downstairs to join them for dinner, holding my posture straight and keeping my expression blank. I ate roasted chicken and listened to Greg outline a fictional vacation they would take in the fall. He talked about booking a private villa in Italy, praising the upcoming favorable exchange rates. He was already spending my tuition money in his head. I chewed my food and offered polite nods. My phone rested in my pocket, silent and heavy. The waiting tested my nerves far more than the initial discovery. I returned to my room after helping clear the dishes. I locked my bedroom door and pulled the laptop from its hiding spot. I logged back into the secure client with steady hands. A new notification waited in the inbox. Victor did not ask for clarification. He did not question my claims or ask to speak with my father. He recognized the severity of the legal terminology and saw the undeniable proof resting in the encrypted attachment. His reply contained exactly 3 sentences. The words were sharp, concise, and lethal. He wrote, "Be at my office tomorrow at 8 in the morning. Bring everything." I walked out the front door at 7 in the morning carrying a heavy leather tote bag instead of my usual backpack. I told my mother I had an early study group to finish a summer capstone project for my high school diploma requirements. She smiled over the rim of her coffee mug, wishing me luck, entirely oblivious to the payload I carried over my shoulder. The drive to downtown Wilmington took 20 minutes, but the transition in atmosphere felt like crossing into another dimension. The suburbs were designed for comfort and illusion. Downtown Wilmington is a vertical canyon of steel and glass where the wealth of the nation is legally anchored. I parked my car in a subterranean garage and took the express elevator to the 32nd floor of a towering corporate building. The doors opened directly into the reception area of Caldwell & Associates. The law firm did not need flashy branding or aggressive marketing to assert its dominance. The lobby was an expansive stretch of dark mahogany paneling and polished marble floors. A profound silence hung in the air, a deliberate architectural choice communicating the palpable weight of legal precision. There was no chaotic ringing of telephones or frantic rushing of interns. This was a sanctuary of structured rules. The receptionist did not ask for my name or the nature of my business. She simply nodded, stood up from her desk, and escorted me down a long, quiet corridor lined with abstract art and frosted glass doors. She stopped at the corner suite, opened the heavy oak door, and stepped aside. Victor Caldwell stood behind a desk the size of a dining table, looking out over the sprawling Delaware River. He was a man in his late 60s with slate-gray hair and a rigid posture forged from decades of courtroom warfare. He wore a navy suit that draped perfectly across his broad shoulders. My grandfather always said Victor possessed a mind like a steel trap, capable of dissecting a lie before the speaker even finished their sentence. They had built their early careers together in these very buildings, sharing a deep mutual respect for the preservation of generational legacy. Victor turned away from the window and walked toward me. He did not offer a warm, comforting hug. He offered a firm, professional handshake. "Take a seat," Marin Victor said, gesturing to the leather chair opposite his desk. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that commanded instant obedience. I sat down and placed my heavy tote bag on the carpet. I did not waste time with emotional pleasantries. I unzipped the bag and retrieved the physical prints of the high-resolution photographs I took the night before, placing them squarely on his desk. Next to the photos, I laid the encrypted titanium flash drive containing the digital metadata. Victor reached into his breast pocket and put on a pair of silver wire-rimmed reading glasses. He picked up the photographs. He did not gasp. He did not offer performative expressions of shock or pity. He reviewed the evidence with a chilling clinical detachment that mirrored my own internal state. For 10 long minutes, the only sound in the room was the steady ticking of a brass grandfather clock in the corner and the rustle of heavy bond paper sliding across the desk. I watched his eyes track across the irregular ink patterns of the forged signature. I booted up my laptop, typed in the decryption key, and turned the screen toward him to display the network logs and the drafted emails detailing my fabricated mental health crisis. Victor absorbed the data, reading every line of my father's desperate prose. He cross-referenced the IP addresses and the session timestamps I had gathered. He slowly removed his glasses and folded them on the polished mahogany. "You did well," Marin Victor said, resting his forearms on the desk. "Your grandfather would be immensely proud of your discipline. You gathered an undeniable chain of custody. You proved intent, opportunity, and execution." A brief wave of relief washed over me, but it evaporated the moment Victor leaned forward, his expression darkening into something far more severe. "However, we are facing a timeline that is much shorter than you realize," he continued. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I asked him what he meant. Victor turned his own computer monitor toward me. He tapped a few keys, logging into a secure portal connected directly to the trust holding bank. "Your father did not just practice forging your signature in his home office," Victor said, his tone turning razor sharp. "He formally submitted the power of attorney to the regional bank manager yesterday afternoon." My heart skipped a beat. My breathing stopped. They had already fired the weapon. If the bank approved the fraudulent document, my parents would gain immediate legal access to the escrow accounts. I braced for Victor to pick up his desk phone and shout orders to shut the account down. I expected him to file an immediate injunction to call the local authorities to stop the bleeding before my future drained away into my brother's failed tech startup. Instead, Victor leaned back in his leather chair and folded his hands, the picture of unnerving calm. Under Delaware law, forging a signature to manipulate a trust estate is not just a messy family dispute, he explained, holding my gaze. It is a severe felony. The statutes here are designed to protect beneficiaries with ruthless efficiency. But we face a tactical problem. If I call the bank right now and block this transaction, your father will claim it was a simple misunderstanding. I stared at him, struggling to comprehend how my father could dismiss a forged legal document. Greg will hire a team of defense attorneys, Victor continued, anticipating my confusion. He will argue that he was merely preparing contingency paperwork for your supposed mental health breakdown, and that your mother or a careless assistant mistakenly filed it with the bank. He will muddy the waters. He will drag this through civil mediation for years, tying up your tuition funds in endless litigation while portraying you as an ungrateful, unstable teenager. We cannot give him the opportunity to build a defensive narrative. I swallowed hard, the reality of my father's manipulative talents settling heavily over me. So how do we stop him? I asked. In the cybersecurity world, you call it a honeypot, Victor said, a faint predatory smile touching the corners of his mouth. In my profession, we call it letting the rope play out. We are going to execute a controlled sting. He explained the mechanics of the trap. We needed to let my parents proceed with their plan just far enough to cross an irreversible legal threshold. The forged document currently sitting at the local bank was a state-level crime easy to obscure with expensive lawyers. But my parents' ultimate goal was to cancel my university enrollment, trigger a tuition refund, and route the trust disbursements across state lines to pay off my brother's creditors. Once they attempt to move those funds through interstate banking channels based on fraudulent pretenses, the crime elevates from local forgery to federal wire fraud, Victor said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. The federal authorities do not care about your father's country club reputation or his charity board seats. They only care about the financial logs. I realized the sheer magnitude of what Victor was proposing. We were going to let my parents think they had won. We were going to allow them to cancel my housing, withdraw my enrollment, and initiate the financial transfer, knowing that every step they took tightened the snare around their own necks. It is a dangerous game, Victor warned, his eyes searching my face for any sign of hesitation. You will have to return home and live with them for the next 3 days, acting as though nothing is wrong while they actively dismantle your freshman year. You must let them believe their plan is working flawlessly. The moment they hit the button to transfer the money, the trap becomes inescapable. I looked out the window at the sprawling city of Wilmington, feeling the weight of the decision. My parents had spent my entire life treating me like an afterthought, assuming I lacked the strength to defend my own existence. They were about to learn that silence is not weakness. Silence is preparation. I turned back to Victor, holding his intense gaze without flinching. Let them pull the trigger, I said. I will pack my boxes and smile until the moment they fall. The timeline compressed with terrifying speed. Only 3 days remained until freshman orientation. The late summer heat in Delaware hung thick and stagnant, mirroring the suffocating tension inside our suburban home. I spent the morning playing my assigned role, packing the final few boxes of textbooks and dorm supplies, sealing them with clear packing tape. My parents maintained their cheerful facade, navigating the kitchen with the relaxed energy of people who believed their problems were already solved. Linda offered to make me a sandwich while Greg whistled a tune, reading his golf magazines on the patio. Their casual joy felt entirely parasitic. They were drawing their relief directly from the destruction of my future. I needed an excuse to leave the house and breathe authentic air. I told my mother I had to purchase a few extra desk organizers from the local retail plaza. She handed me a $20 bill with a bright, performative smile, instructing me to drive safely. I took the cash, climbed into my beat-up sedan, and drove toward the commercial district. I parked in the far corner of the asphalt lot, turned off the ignition, and leaned my head back against the headrest. Then my phone vibrated in my pocket. I had secretly configured my university student portal to send immediate text alerts for any administrative changes, bypassing the primary email address my parents currently monitored. I pulled the device from my jeans and looked at the glowing screen. The notification banner contained a standardized bureaucratic message from the University Housing Department. Dear Marin Montgomery, this automated message confirms that your residential housing contract and associated dining plan for the upcoming fall semester have been officially terminated by a verified parent proxy. Your room assignment has been released to the waitlist. My lungs forgot how to process oxygen. A sudden visceral wave of terror crashed through my chest. The screen blurred as my hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough to turn my knuckles bone white. Being aware of a trap is vastly different from feeling its steel jaws snap shut around your ankle. The abstract threat had just materialized into stark reality. My father had pulled the trigger. He had logged into the portal, impersonated me, or used the forged documents to assert his parental authority and erased my physical place at the university. I was officially unregistered. I was unhoused. If I drove to campus right now, I would have no bed, no food, and no legal standing as a student. I closed my eyes and pictured my father sitting in his home office, clicking the submit button with the same detached efficiency he used in his corporate life. Years ago, Greg acquired a struggling regional logistics company. A week before the winter holidays, he liquidated the firm, fired the entire staff without severance, and absorbed the assets to artificially inflate his own quarterly margins. He came home that night, poured a glass of expensive scotch, and slept soundly. He viewed those employees as expendable numbers on a spreadsheet. I realized in the suffocating heat of my car that he viewed his own daughter through the exact same lens. I was merely a line item to be liquidated so he could balance Kyle's disastrous ledger. Panic is a biological response, but yielding to it is a choice. I forced myself to inhale deeply, holding the humid air in my chest, before releasing it in a slow, controlled stream. In the discipline of network security, a system alert signifying a breach does not mean the war is lost. It simply means the adversary has committed to a specific vector of attack. Greg had initiated his final maneuver. This was the exact escalation Victor and I had been waiting for. I unlocked my phone, bypassed the university notification, and dialed Victor's direct office line. The phone rang only twice before the sharp, gravelly voice of my grandfather's former law partner filled the quiet cabin of my car. "Speak," Victor commanded, skipping all polite introductions. "He canceled the dorm," I said, maintaining a level, steady vocal register despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. "I just received the automated alert. Greg terminated the housing contract and the meal plan acting as a parent proxy. He is triggering the tuition refund protocol right now." A brief pause hung on the line. I heard the faint rustle of heavy bond paper shifting across a mahogany desk. "Excellent," Victor replied, his tone devoid of panic, resonating instead with cold, predatory satisfaction. "Your father has officially crossed the threshold. By initiating a financial transfer based on the forged power of attorney across state banking lines, he is attempting federal wire fraud. I am executing our countermeasures immediately." Victor detailed the precise legal firewall he was about to deploy. He was not going to call the standard bursar's office and argue with a low-level clerk. Delaware attorneys operating at Victor's tier do not wait in administrative queues. He was contacting the university's general counsel and the senior vice president of the holding bank simultaneously. He would present the emergency injunction we prepared yesterday. This injunction institutes a hard freeze on every single dollar associated with your educational trust. Victor explained his words, clipping with authoritative speed. The money is being transferred into a secure, untouchable escrow account that only the university legal department and my firm can access. Your father cannot withdraw a single cent. He cannot route the funds to a joint account, and he certainly cannot use them to pay off your brother's creditors. The capital is locked behind an impenetrable legal vault. "But what about the portal?" I asked, wiping a bead of sweat from my forehead. "If Greg logs in and sees the funds are frozen, he will know I caught him. He will panic and destroy the remaining physical evidence in the house." Victor offered a low, grim chuckle. "That brings us to the most beautiful part of a controlled sting, Marin. We are implementing a digital illusion. I have instructed the university technology department to spoof the outward-facing interface of the parent portal. When Greg logs into the dashboard to check the status of his theft, he will not see a frozen account or a legal warning. He will see a pending transfer status. I realize the brilliance of the strategy washing over me. It is a honeypot." "Precisely," Victor confirmed. "The system will display a superficial confirmation page indicating that a check is being processed and mailed to his home address. He will see exactly what his greed conditions him to see. He will spend the next 3 days celebrating a phantom victory, entirely unaware that the money is already gone and the trap is welded shut. You just need to hold your position. Go home, pack your bags, and let him celebrate. I thanked Victor, ended the call, and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The crushing weight of impending homelessness evaporated, replaced by a profound electric clarity. My father believed he held all the power because he controlled the household environment, but he was operating inside a simulated reality designed by the daughter he consistently underestimated. I started the engine, drove out of the retail plaza, and headed back toward the affluent Wilmington suburb. When I pushed open the heavy oak front door of our house, the smell of garlic and roasting herbs drifted from the kitchen. Linda was preparing a lavish dinner, pouring a glass of white wine while humming a cheerful melody. Greg stood by the marble island, reviewing a stack of incoming mail with a relaxed, triumphant posture. They looked like a couple who had just secured their future. "Did you find the desk organizers you needed?" Linda asked, offering her brightest, most deceptive maternal smile. "I did," I replied, walking into the kitchen and setting my small shopping bag on the counter. "I found everything I needed to get organized for the semester." Greg looked up from his mail, his eyes crinkling at the corners with genuine oblivious satisfaction. "It is going to be a great year, Marin. We are so very proud of how responsible you are being." I smiled back at him, holding his gaze without a single tremor of fear. The man who just secretly canceled my bed and my food was offering me a toast. I accepted the compliment, knowing that his entire empire was built on a trapdoor I was about to open. The dining room chandelier cast a warm, amber glow over the heavy mahogany table. Tonight was meant to be my grand send-off. It was the evening before freshman orientation, and my parents had orchestrated a feast that looked like a glossy magazine feature. My mother spent the entire afternoon preparing roasted lamb with a rosemary crust and arranging the delicate porcelain plates we normally reserved for prestigious guests. The dramatic irony hung over the spread like a thick summer fog. They were hosting a lavish farewell supper for a daughter they believed they had just successfully anchored to a local community college and stripped of her inheritance. Kyle arrived 20 minutes late. He walked through the front door wearing a tailored suede jacket that retailed for more than most people earned in a single month. He carried himself with the breezy confidence of a man who had never faced a genuine consequence in his 24 years of existence. He took his seat across from me and immediately began dominating the conversation. Kyle did not talk about his recent bankruptcy or the venture capital he had squandered on expensive office spaces and useless marketing campaigns. Instead, he leaned over his pristine plate and boasted about his next major business venture. "I have a new angel investor lined up," Kyle said, taking a long sip from a crystal goblet of imported wine. "The details are still being finalized behind closed doors, but the initial capital injection is going to be substantial. We are talking about a major pivot into decentralized logistics. The seed money should clear the accounts by early next week." I kept my expression neutral while I cut a small piece of lamb. I knew exactly who his new angel investor was. He was talking about my educational trust fund. My father had clearly promised Kyle that a fresh wave of liquid cash was imminent. Greg and Linda were banking on my stolen tuition to fund another one of Kyle's expensive delusions. My brother spoke about decentralized logistics with total unearned authority, but he could not even manage a basic personal checking account. He was building castles in the sky using bricks he believed he had pried from my foundation. My father sat at the head of the table, radiating smug satisfaction. Greg poured himself another glass of red wine and smiled at his favored son. "That is the spirit, Kyle," my father said. "True entrepreneurs never let a minor hurdle disrupt their long-term vision. You pivot and you rebuild. That is how real wealth is sustained in this state." The sheer audacity of the scene was mesmerizing. I was sitting inside a theatrical production where I was the only person who knew the script had been altered. I ate the roasted meat. I drank the sparkling water. I nodded politely at Kyle's empty corporate buzzwords. In cybersecurity training, we learned to study malware in an isolated sandbox environment. You let the virus execute its code inside a safe simulated network so you can observe its behavior without risking the actual system architecture. My family dining room was a sandbox. I was watching the hostile program run its routine. Midway through the meal, Greg tapped his silver fork against his crystal wine glass. The sharp ringing sound brought the casual conversation to a halt. My father stood up, smoothing the front of his expensive cashmere sweater. He raised his glass toward the center of the room, adopting the same authoritative posture he utilized during his charity board meetings. "I want to propose a toast." Greg began projecting his voice to fill the formal space. "We are facing a lot of transitions as a family right now. Change is never easy, but it tests our resilience. I want to raise a glass to family unity. We protect our own. We support each other through thick and thin." He turned his gaze directly toward me. His eyes were crinkled at the corners, feigning deep paternal warmth. "And I want to acknowledge Marin tonight. Tomorrow marks the beginning of a new chapter for her. Marin, you have always been such an understanding and low-maintenance daughter. You never demand the spotlight. You always recognize what the family needs, and you adjust without complaint. We are incredibly proud of the mature young woman you have become." The words settled over the table like a suffocating blanket. Understanding. Low maintenance. Adjust without complaint. He was not praising my character. He was praising my perceived compliance. He was raising a glass to my willingness to be quietly erased. He believed I was marching obediently toward a canceled dorm room and a revoked admission so he could funnel my grandfather's legacy into Kyle's empty bank account. To Marin, my mother echoed, raising her glass with a radiant smile. To Marin, Kyle chimed in, offering a lazy, privileged smirk. I raised my own glass of ice water and met my father's gaze. "Thank you, Dad," I said. My voice was clear and remarkably steady. "I appreciate everything you have done to prepare me for tomorrow." Linda clapped her hands together in sudden delight. She reached for her smartphone resting next to her plate. "We need to document this," she announced. "The night before our little girl heads off to her new adventure, everyone lean in together." I leaned across the table. Kyle threw an arm casually around my shoulder. Greg stood behind us, resting his heavy hands on the back of my chair. Linda stretched her arm out to frame the perfect selfie. She instructed us to smile. I arranged my features into a bright, flawless expression. The camera flashed, capturing the deceptive moment forever. Linda immediately began tapping the screen, applying filters, and typing out a performative caption for her local social media followers. So proud of our brilliant daughter, as she embarks on her college journey, she narrated aloud while she typed. "Family is everything. Blessed." She was posting a public celebration of a college journey she had secretly terminated 72 hours earlier. She wanted her affluent friends and suburban neighbors to see the illusion of a supportive mother. When the false narrative about my deferred enrollment broke next week, she would use this very photo to garner local sympathy. She would play the heartbroken parent dealing with a troubled teenager who could not handle the academic pressure. The digital photograph was just another layer of her premeditated alibi. I watched her hit the publish button, and a profound realization washed over me. For 18 years, I had operated under the naive assumption that their conditional affection was just a flawed version of love. I thought if I stayed quiet enough and achieved high enough grades, they would eventually recognize my inherent value. Sitting at that mahogany table watching them celebrate my impending ruin, I finally understood the truth. These people did not love me. They did not even know me. They only loved what they could extract from my existence. They loved my ability to make them look like successful parents. They loved my quiet obedience. And most of all, they loved the $120,000 my grandfather had legally attached to my name. The moment that realization took root, I expected to feel a surge of intense grief. Instead, I felt nothing but a clean surgical detachment. The emotional tether tying me to my parents simply snapped. The residual hurt evaporated, leaving behind a pristine clinical focus. They were no longer my family. They were just an external threat that Victor and I had successfully contained. The rest of the evening proceeded with agonizing slowness. Linda served a rich chocolate cake. Kyle talked endlessly about his imaginary startup. Greg told stories about his own college days, rewriting his personal history to sound more impressive than it actually was. I participated in the charade flawlessly. I laughed at the right moments. I offered polite, encouraging questions. I ate every single bite of my dessert. I gave them the exact version of the defeated daughter they thought they had conquered. By 10 o'clock, the celebration finally concluded. I thanked my parents for the beautiful dinner, hugged my brother, and walked up the carpeted stairs to my bedroom. I closed the heavy wooden door and turned the lock. The room was mostly bare. The cardboard boxes were stacked neatly in the corner, waiting to be loaded into the trunk of my car. Only my mattress remained unmade. I walked over to the window and looked out at the quiet suburban street bathed in the glow of the amber streetlights. The Delaware neighborhood was asleep, unaware of the silent war concluding inside our walls. I changed into my pajamas and climbed into my childhood bed for the very last time. I lay on my back, staring up at the shadowed ceiling. Tomorrow morning we would load my belongings into the vehicle. Tomorrow morning Greg would insist we stop at the university financial aid office to sort out some minor administrative paperwork. Tomorrow morning Victor Caldwell would step out of a back room and deliver the fatal blow to their entire empire. I pulled the covers up to my chest, my heart beat with a slow, restful rhythm. I did not feel anxious. I did not feel scared. I closed my eyes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, knowing exactly what was going to happen when the clock struck 10. Morning arrived with the harsh glare of late summer sunlight piercing through the gaps in my bedroom blinds. I woke up knowing this was the final day I would sleep under this roof. The house downstairs bustled with a frantic artificial energy. I dressed quickly, selecting a simple gray sweater and dark jeans, clothes that offered comfort and utility rather than style. I slung my worn canvas backpack over my shoulder. Inside that bag rested my legitimate university enrollment files, directly secured by Victor Caldwell, and the encrypted titanium flash drive holding the digital autopsy of my parents' scheme. I walked down the carpeted stairs to find Greg and Linda waiting by the front door. Greg wore a tailored navy blazer, the uniform of a man intent on commanding respect from every person he encountered. Linda held a ceramic travel mug, her face painted with a bright, tight smile that did not match the rigid posture of her shoulders. They were vibrating with an eagerness they tried to disguise as parental pride. In their minds, today was payday. "Let us get these boxes loaded," Greg announced, clapping his hands together. "We have a busy schedule ahead of us." I carried my cardboard boxes out to the driveway. Greg arranged them in the trunk of his pristine leased sport utility vehicle. He handled my belongings with careless speed, tossing my cybersecurity textbooks and folded clothes into the back. He did not care if my things were damaged because he believed they would be coming right back to this house by noon. He thought I was just taking a brief, humiliating detour before accepting my fate as a deferred student forced to attend the local community college. We climbed into the vehicle. Greg started the engine and pulled out of our affluent suburban neighborhood. The drive to the university took just under an hour. The physical journey across the Delaware landscape felt surreal. I watched the dense green foliage and the sprawling corporate campuses blur past the tinted passenger window. The confined space of the car grew heavy with suffocating manufactured cheerfulness. Linda turned around in her leather seat to look at me. "You must be feeling a mix of emotions today, Marin. Transitions are always tough. Just remember we are here to support whatever happens." I met her gaze and offered a mild, compliant nod. "Thank you, Mom. I am ready for whatever comes next." Greg drummed his fingers against the leather steering wheel, keeping his eyes on the highway. "We do have one quick stop to make before we unload your boxes at the residential hall," he said, adopting a breezy, casual tone. "The financial aid office sent a notification yesterday. Just a minor administrative hiccup regarding your scholarship disbursements. We need to swing by the bursar's office and sign a few forms to clear the ledger." The lie was delivered with effortless precision. He framed the detour as a tedious bureaucratic chore. I knew the truth. Greg was steering us toward the administrative building to collect the substantial refund check he believed was generated when he secretly canceled my enrollment. He expected to walk up to a counter, present his forged power of attorney if necessary, and walk away with a cashier's check for $120,000. "That sounds fine," I replied, my voice steady and untroubled. "Better to handle the paperwork early." Greg smiled at the rearview mirror. "Always the sensible girl. We will get it sorted out in 10 minutes. The vehicle exited the highway and merged onto the main thoroughfare approaching the university. The landscape shifted from corporate parks to towering oak trees and sprawling green quads. The late summer air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and impending autumn. The campus buzzed with chaotic, nervous energy. We passed clusters of incoming freshmen hauling rolling carts loaded with mini fridges, desk lamps, and bedding. Parents hovered nearby, their faces etched with genuine anxiety and pride. I watched a father wrap his arm around his son's shoulder, pointing toward a brick dormitory with a wide, encouraging smile. The contrast struck me with sharp clarity. Those families were enduring the bittersweet pain of separation, spending their hard-earned money to launch their children into the world. My parents were driving me onto this campus with the specific intent of liquidating my future to cover the debts of my reckless older brother. They viewed this institution not as a place of learning, but as a bank vault waiting to be cracked. Greg navigated the vehicle toward the central administrative sector of the campus. The architecture here was imposing and traditional. Century-old red brick buildings with white stone columns projected an aura of permanence and institutional authority. Greg parked the vehicle in a visitor spot, adjusted the collar of his blazer, and stepped out into the bright morning light. Linda followed, clutching her designer handbag, her eyes scanning the area with predatory anticipation. I slung my canvas backpack over my shoulder, the straps dug into my collarbone, a physical reminder of the evidence secured inside. I touched the front pocket, feeling the solid metal ridge of the flash drive through the fabric. I did not feel a trace of panic. The nervous tension that plagued me throughout the week had vanished, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. Victor Caldwell had already fortified the battlefield. I just needed to walk my parents directly into the center of the trap. We approached the heavy wooden doors of the bursar's office. Greg walked a few paces ahead, adopting his corporate persona. He squared his shoulders, lifted his chin, and pushed the doors open. The interior of the administrative building was a cavernous space filled with echoing voices and the rhythmic hum of receipt printers. Dozens of students and parents stood in long, winding queues, clutching enrollment forms and financial aid appeals. The clerks behind the long mahogany counter looked exhausted processing transaction after transaction. Greg did not join the back of the standard line. He believed his status exempted him from waiting with the general public. He bypassed the roped stanchions and marched directly toward a side counter designated for specialized appointments. Linda trailed right behind him, casting dismissive glances at the families standing in the main queue. I followed at a steady, measured pace, absorbing the details of the room. A young university clerk looked up from her computer monitor as Greg approached the specialized desk. She offered a polite but strained greeting. "Sir, the main queue begins near the entrance." Greg rested his hands flat on the counter and leaned forward, deploying a charming, authoritative smile designed to disarm lower-level employees. "Good morning," he said, his voice resonating with unearned confidence. "I am Greg Montgomery. I am here regarding my daughter, Marin. We are dealing with an urgent administrative error concerning her trust disbursements and a recent housing cancellation. I received a notification that a surplus refund requires my signature. I need to speak with a senior administrator or the director of financial aid to collect the funds." The clerk frowned, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. "Let me pull up the student record, sir. What is the identification number?" Greg recited my student ID from memory. He had memorized the digits while executing his sabotage earlier in the week. The clerk typed the numbers into the university database. I watched her eyes scan the information populating on her screen. Her polite expression faltered, replaced by a look of deep confusion. "Sir," she stammered, glancing nervously between Greg and the computer monitor. "There is a restriction code on this account. I cannot process any financial requests." Greg let out a low, patronizing chuckle, shaking his head as if dealing with an incompetent subordinate. "I understand the system might look complicated to you. That restriction code is likely due to the medical deferment I filed on my daughter's behalf. We have the power of attorney paperwork right here. Please just fetch your supervisor so we can clear the ledger and collect the check. We have a very busy schedule today." The clerk stood up from her chair, her face pale. "Please wait here one moment, Mr. Montgomery. I need to retrieve the director." She turned and hurried through a frosted glass door situated behind the main counter. Greg looked back at Linda and offered a smug, victorious wink. He turned to me and patted my shoulder, playing the role of the capable protector. "Do not worry, Marin," he murmured. "Bureaucracy always moves slow. We will have this sorted out in a minute, and then we can get you back home to rest." I did not flinch. I did not step away from his touch. I stood perfectly still on the polished tile floor, listening to the muffled sounds of conversation emerging from the back office. The heavy frosted glass door swung open again. The clerk stepped out, but she was not alone. The footsteps echoing behind her did not belong to a standard university administrator. The trap was armed, and my father was still smiling, entirely unaware that the ground beneath his feet was about to vanish. The frosted glass door clicked open, swinging wide on its brushed metal hinges. The director of financial aid emerged first. He was a middle-aged man wearing a conservative gray suit, clutching a thick manila folder against his chest. He did not possess the typical bureaucratic apathy Greg normally relied upon to bully his way through institutional obstacles. The director looked deeply unsettled, his gaze darting toward the floor as he approached our position at the specialized counter. Behind the director walked Victor Caldwell. In a room filled with stressed parents in casual weekend attire, Victor looked like an apex predator stalking into a petting zoo. He wore an immaculate charcoal pinstripe suit, holding a vintage leather briefcase in his left hand. His posture was rigid, forged from decades of dismantling hostile corporate takeovers in downtown Wilmington. He carried an aura of untouchable authority that instantly changed the air pressure in the cavernous administrative office. Greg stood leaning against the mahogany counter, his charming, commanding smile still plastered across his face. When his eyes locked onto Victor, that practiced charm dissolved into stark, naked panic. The confident patriarch vanished in a fraction of a second. He was suddenly replaced by the insecure, inadequate son who had spent his entire youth failing to impress his father's formidable law partner. Growing up, Greg tried to mirror the men who built the Wilmington legal empires, but he lacked the intellect and the discipline. Victor always represented the standard my father could never meet. Seeing that standard materialize inside a university billing department triggered decades of buried inadequacy. Linda let out a short, sharp gasp. Her manicured fingers tightened around the strap of her designer handbag until her knuckles turned a stark, bruised purple. The blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her carefully applied makeup looking like a grotesque mask painted over pale chalk. She took a half-step backward, her heels clicking loudly against the polished tile floor. Victor Gregg choked out. The name scraped against his throat, lacking all of its usual bravado. "What are you doing here?" Victor did not raise his voice. He did not point fingers or initiate a messy shouting match. He stepped up to the counter, placed his heavy leather briefcase on the polished wood, and spoke in a low, devastatingly calm baritone that carried across the quiet office. "I am fulfilling my fiduciary duty," Gregory Victor said, his eyes locking onto my father with surgical precision. "A duty your father entrusted to me because he knew a day exactly like today was inevitable." Greg swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing above his silk tie. He glanced nervously at the director of financial aid, attempting to construct a makeshift defensive wall. "This is a private family matter, Victor. We are dealing with a severe medical situation regarding my daughter. You have no jurisdiction here. We are simply collecting a tuition refund to cover her impending psychiatric care." Victor turned his head slowly, acknowledging the director standing beside him. The director opened the manila folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the counter toward my father. It was a formal notice of injunction stamped with the seal of the Delaware Chancery Court. "As the designated co-signer of the Montgomery Educational Trust, I have full jurisdiction over any attempt to liquidate the principal balance," Victor stated, his voice ringing with lethal clarity. "The durable power of attorney you submitted to the regional bank branch on Thursday is a fraudulent instrument." Linda opened her mouth instinctively, trying to deploy her social grace to escape accountability. She reached a trembling hand toward Victor, her voice climbing into a high, desperate register. "Victor, please, you misunderstand the situation. Marin is not well. We were just preparing contingency paperwork to ensure she receives the help she desperately needs. It was a preemptive measure." Victor shifted his gaze to my mother. The sheer coldness in his eyes silenced her instantly. "Your husband drafted those fictional emails regarding a mental health crisis on his home desktop 3 days ago," Victor replied, stripping away her maternal facade with a single sentence. "You spent hours practicing the forgery of your daughter's signature, using a blue fountain pen stolen from her desk. We possess the digital metadata, the Internet Protocol routing logs, and the high-resolution macro photographs documenting the irregular ink pressure of your forgery. Do not insult my intelligence by framing a premeditated theft as parental concern." Greg gripped the edge of the mahogany counter. His knuckles matched my mother's in their pale intensity. He was searching for a lifeline, clinging desperately to the digital illusion he believed he still controlled. He shook his head, offering a frantic, hollow laugh. "You are bluffing," Greg insisted, his voice cracking under the strain. "The university portal confirmed the transaction this morning. I saw the dashboard alert with my own eyes. The housing contract was canceled. The refund check was processed and placed into the mail. You are too late, Victor. The money is already in transit to our primary accounts." Victor offered a faint, grim smile. The smile did not convey humor. It conveyed terminal finality. "The portal was a mirrored sandbox," Victor explained softly. Greg froze. The frantic energy drained from his body, leaving him rigid and hollow. "We intercepted your request the exact moment you used a proxy login to cancel her housing contract." Victor continued, delivering the killing blow with effortless grace. "The dashboard you monitored all weekend was a superficial digital honeypot designed by your daughter. The $120,000 you attempted to wire across state lines is currently locked inside an impenetrable legal escrow directly managed by the University General Counsel. You will never touch a single cent of that money." The surrounding queue of parents and incoming freshmen had fallen entirely silent. The ambient noise of the busy bursar's office, the whir of printers, the chatter of excited families ceased. Dozens of strangers stood frozen in place, their attention locked onto the spectacular collapse occurring at the specialized counter. Every word Victor spoke resonated through the cavernous space. Greg realized his reputation, his most prized and guarded possession, was disintegrating in real time in front of a captive audience. The affluent suburban facade he spent decades maintaining vanished into the crisp, late summer air. The strangers watching him did not see a successful corporate executive or a charitable board member. They saw a desperate exposed fraud who tried to steal his own daughter's tuition to cover a bad debt. I stood a few feet away, observing the destruction of my abusers. It felt like watching a highly calculated, controlled demolition. The structure collapsed inward, falling precisely as designed, leaving the surrounding environment safe and untouched. I did not feel a trace of pity. I felt the pristine clinical satisfaction of a patched vulnerability. Greg stared at the injunction notice resting on the counter. His chest heaved with shallow, rapid breaths. He realized the money was gone, but his arrogant mind had not yet processed the staggering magnitude of his legal peril. He believed failing to steal the money was the end of the ordeal. He assumed he could simply cut his losses, grab his wife, and retreat to his leased sport utility vehicle to salvage whatever dignity remained. He turned to Linda, grabbing her elbow, signaling an immediate retreat. But Victor Caldwell had not yet opened his vintage leather briefcase. The trap had effectively secured my future, but the execution of the evidence was just beginning. Greg's hand shot out. He sought the one piece of leverage he thought he still commanded. He aimed his grip toward my left forearm, intending to clamp down and drag me toward the exit doors. He operated on a primal instinct, preserved by men who have spent a lifetime burying their mistakes behind closed doors. Years prior, when an accounting discrepancy arose at his country club, Greg silenced the auditor by inviting him into a private back room and leveraging his local reputation to force compliance. He thrived in shadows and whispered ultimatums. He believed if he could just pull me out of this public spotlight, he could force me back into submission inside the isolated cabin of his vehicle. My reflexes, honed by years of hypervigilance in that house, activated instantly. I shifted my weight backward, sliding my sneaker across the polished tile, placing myself neatly out of his physical reach. His fingers caught nothing but the crisp, conditioned air of the administrative building. He stumbled a fraction of an inch, his balance betrayed by his sudden lack of control. I looked directly into his panicked eyes. For 18 years, I had maintained a strict vow of silence to keep the peace. I swallowed my opinions, minimized my achievements, and faded into the background so my brother could occupy the center stage. I was conditioned to view obedience as my only acceptable currency. Today, that currency lost all its value. I spoke for the first time since we entered the building. I did not whisper. I pitched my voice at a level, resonant volume that carried effortlessly across the quiet room, ensuring every parent, student, and university clerk heard every single syllable. "I know about the forged signature, Dad," I said. The words landed like physical strikes. Greg froze, his arm still suspended in the empty space between us. "I know about Kyle's debt." I continued, keeping my vocal cadence smooth and unhurried. "I know you researched medical decanting protocols, and I know you tried to cancel my dorm to steal my tuition refund." Linda let out a strangled, high-pitched sound, bringing both of her trembling hands to her mouth. The performative maternal mask shattered into 1,000 irrecoverable pieces. The surrounding crowd shifted, a collective wave of shock rolling through the onlookers. A woman standing in the main queue covered her mouth. A father holding a stack of enrollment forms stared at Greg with undisguised disgust. Greg opened his mouth, searching for a lie, an excuse, a charming deflection to patch the gaping hole in his reality. He found nothing. The oxygen had been siphoned out of his lungs. Victor Caldwell seized the opening with flawless legal timing. He placed his hands on the brass latches of his vintage leather briefcase. The sharp, metallic clicks echoed like a judge striking a gavel. He lifted the lid, reached inside, and withdrew a thick bound folder. He raised the file in the air for a brief theatrical second before dropping it flat onto the mahogany counter. The heavy thud resonated through the floorboards. "Gregory, you are no longer dealing with an internal family dispute," Victor announced, his baritone voice commanding the total attention of the room. "You are standing in the blast radius of a federal investigation." Victor opened the folder and began extracting the contents, laying the evidence out across the counter, like a dealer turning over a royal flush. He did not speak in vague generalities. He wielded the specific terminology of a prosecutor presenting an airtight indictment. "We possess the high-resolution macro photographs of the durable power of attorney you submitted to the regional bank branch," Victor stated, tapping a glossy print with his index finger. "The forensic analysis clearly demonstrates inconsistent ink pressure, confirming your wife spent hours tracing Marin's signature using a stolen fountain pen. That constitutes identity theft under Delaware state law." He pulled out a secondary stack of papers, covered in dense lines of digital code. Furthermore, Victor continued his pace, accelerating, matching the escalating dread visible on my father's face. "We have the localized threat reports, the session identifiers, and the Internet Protocol routing logs. These metrics prove unequivocally that you used your home network to bypass a secure university portal posing as your daughter to terminate her residential housing contract. That action elevates your deception. By attempting to induce a financial transfer across state lines under false pretenses, you have met the exact legal criteria for federal wire fraud." Greg's knees seemed to buckle slightly. He leaned his weight against the counter, his pristine navy blazer suddenly looking wrinkled and hollow. He was a man who prided himself on reading the room, and the room was currently watching his execution. Add to this a clear breach of fiduciary duty regarding your attempted manipulation of a protected trust estate. Victor finalized closing the folder with a sharp, decisive motion. "You orchestrated a premeditated conspiracy to defraud a legal adult of $120,000. The magnitude of the charges hung heavy in the crisp campus air. In corporate Delaware, wire fraud is not a minor infraction. It is a career-ending, reputation-destroying felony that carries mandatory prison sentences." My father spent his life terrified of social embarrassment. Now he was staring down the barrel of an extended federal incarceration. Linda turned her desperate, tear-filled eyes toward Victor. She reached out, her voice cracking as she pleaded for a reprieve. "Victor, we have known you for 20 years. You cannot do this. We are a good family. We just made a terrible mistake under severe financial duress. Please let us handle this internally." Victor did not offer her a shred of sympathy. He adjusted his suit jacket, his expression carved from stone. "I have already briefed the fraud department at the holding bank," Victor informed them, extinguishing her final ember of hope. "The regional manager has flagged your joint accounts for suspicious activity. Additionally, the Delaware state authorities and the University Legal Counsel have received the encrypted digital evidence. Your crime is no longer a secret. It is a matter of public record." Greg's head snapped up. His eyes were wide, frantic, darting toward the glass doors of the administrative building as if expecting a swarm of law enforcement officers to rush through the entrance. He looked down at his own wrists, the reality of handcuffs and a squad car finally penetrating his thick layer of narcissism. "If the authorities have the files," Greg stammered, his voice reduced to a pathetic, breathy whisper, "why are they not here?" Victor turned his gaze toward me, allowing a brief silent moment of profound respect to pass between us. He stepped back, yielding the floor to the architect of the snare. "The only reason you are not leaving this campus in handcuffs today," Victor said, his tone softening, just a fraction, "is because your daughter demonstrated a level of grace you have never shown her. Marin requested a 24-hour grace period. She instructed the authorities to delay the physical arrest warrants, allowing you to walk out of these doors and return to your vehicle quietly." I looked at my parents. They stood paralyzed, their entire universe reduced to ashes. The grace period was not an act of forgiveness. It was a calculated strategic boundary. I wanted them to experience the long, agonizing drive back to their empty suburban house, knowing their affluent lifestyle was over. I wanted them to sit in their pristine living room and watch the clock tick down, feeling the inescapable weight of their own consequences. But the fallout was not contained strictly to my parents. The trap Victor and I designed had a secondary shockwave built into its foundation. My father had linked his own finances to the trust in preparation for the theft, intending to funnel the money directly to Kyle's desperate creditors. He failed to realize that when a federal bank freeze is initiated on a fraudulent transaction, the ice spreads to every single connected node. The true depth of their ruin was about to announce itself, and the notification was resting right inside Greg's tailored pocket. The silence inside the university administrative building was so profound you could hear the hum of the overhead fluorescent lights. My father stood frozen, trapped in the wreckage of his own design. His eyes remained locked on the injunction notice resting on the mahogany counter. Then a sharp, persistent buzzing erupted from inside his tailored suit jacket. The noise shattered the stillness of the room. Greg flinched. He reached into his breast pocket with a trembling hand and pulled out his smartphone. The screen illuminated, projecting a bright glow against his pale face. The caller identification displayed a single name: Kyle. My father stared at the incoming call, his thumb hovering over the accept button. He did not answer. He looked up at Victor Caldwell, his expression morphing from panic into a deep, uncomprehending dread. Victor adjusted the cuffs of his pristine shirt, offering a thin, humorless smile. "You might want to take that, Gregory," Victor suggested, his baritone voice dripping with lethal calm. "Your son is likely encountering some unexpected difficulties processing his morning transactions." Greg swallowed hard. "What did you do?" "I did nothing," Victor replied, folding his hands together in front of his vintage briefcase. "You are the architect of this current predicament. When you orchestrated your fraudulent scheme, you did not just attempt to drain Marin's educational trust. You proactively linked the target destination accounts to the trust routing numbers, preparing for a seamless digital transfer the moment the university issued the refund. You provided the financial institutions with a direct map of your entire network." The blood drained entirely from Greg's face as the reality of modern banking protocols began to dawn on him. "Federal financial systems operate on automated risk management algorithms," Victor explained, articulating every syllable with deliberate precision. "When the holding bank flagged your forged power of attorney and initiated a severe fraud lockdown, the containment protocol did not just secure Marin's escrow. The system traced the linked routing numbers you provided. The bank instantly froze the destination accounts to prevent any dispersal of illicit capital." Greg's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. He looked down at the phone still vibrating relentlessly in his palm. "You tied Kyle's personal checking and business accounts directly to a federal wire fraud investigation," Victor concluded. "The authorities have placed a comprehensive hold on his remaining assets, pending a full criminal review. Your son cannot withdraw a single dollar. He cannot pay his creditors, he cannot buy groceries, and he certainly cannot fund his imaginary decentralized logistics startup. You intended to steal from your daughter to save your golden child. Instead, you handed his entire financial life directly to the federal investigators." The phone stopped buzzing, only to immediately start ringing again. Kyle was desperate, standing at a coffee shop or a gas station somewhere in Wilmington, his debit cards declining one by one. Greg let the device slip from his fingers. It clattered against the polished tile floor, the screen cracking upon impact. He fell back against the counter, sliding down until his elbows rested on the mahogany surface, his face buried in his hands. He had destroyed the one person he actually cared about. Linda watched her husband crumble, and her survival instincts activated. "My mother operates under a very specific psychological framework. When logic and authority fail her, she pivots to emotional theater." Her breathing hitched, transforming into rapid, shallow gasps. She clutched her chest, her manicured nails digging into the fabric of her blouse. She stumbled forward, putting on a spectacular show of hyperventilation. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her expensive makeup, leaving dark streaks across her cheeks. She looked at me, reaching out with both hands, her eyes wide with a practiced, desperate sorrow. "Marin, please." Linda sobbed, her voice echoing through the silent room. "You have to stop this. You are our daughter. We gave you everything. We raised you. You cannot do this to your brother. Kyle needs that money to survive. If this gets out, if our friends hear about this fraud investigation, our family reputation will be ruined. We will be ruined. Tell Victor to release the hold. Please, Marin, I am begging you." She fell to her knees right there in the middle of the bursar's office, bowing her head and weeping loud, dramatic tears. It was a performance designed to generate pity, to make me look like the cruel, heartless child punishing her devoted parents. I stood a few feet away, looking down at the woman who gave birth to me. For 18 years, those tears would have controlled me. I would have felt a surge of guilt, a desperate need to comfort her and smooth over the conflict. I would have apologized for causing a scene and quietly surrendered whatever she demanded. Today, standing in this bright light of the campus administrative building, I felt a profound, crystal-clear detachment. I watched the mechanics of her grief and recognized the hollow machinery underneath. She was not crying because she felt remorse for stealing my future. She was not weeping because she had fractured our relationship. She was crying because her suburban prestige was evaporating. She was hyperventilating because the country club wives would soon whisper about her criminal indictment over afternoon tea. She was mourning her reputation, not her daughter. I shifted my gaze from my weeping mother to the surrounding crowd. Dozens of strangers remained frozen in their tracks. Incoming freshmen, clutching their dorm assignments, stared in wide-eyed disbelief. Fathers and mothers who had just deposited their hard-earned savings to pay for their children's education looked at Greg and Linda with unvarnished disgust. The polished upper-middle-class facade my parents had spent 2 decades curating was stripped away in front of a captive audience. They were no longer the affluent, respectable pillars of the Wilmington community. The designer clothes and the leased luxury vehicle parked outside could not hide the truth resting on the counter. The people in this room saw them for exactly what they were. They were thieves. They were parasites who tried to feast on their own child's potential to feed their own greed. The silence in the room was a heavy, judgmental verdict. No one stepped forward to comfort Linda. No one offered Greg a sympathetic nod. The social isolation my father feared more than anything else had finally arrived, delivered by the daughter he deemed too weak to fight back. The director of financial aid cleared his throat, breaking the heavy stillness. He looked at Greg, his expression professional but devoid of any warmth. Mr. Montgomery, the director, said, his voice echoing slightly. The university takes fraud very seriously. We have cooperated fully with Mr. Caldwell and the authorities to secure the funds. As of this morning, your daughter is recognized as an independent student for all financial and residential matters. You are no longer authorized to access her academic records, her housing assignments, or her financial accounts. Greg slowly lifted his head from his hands. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. The arrogant glow, the commanding posture, the country club charm. It was all gone, washed away by the inescapable tide of his own consequences. He stared at the cracked phone on the floor, the screen still illuminating with missed calls from the son he had just bankrupted. I felt the sturdy, reassuring presence of Victor Caldwell standing just a few feet away, closing his leather briefcase with a satisfying metallic click. The trap had functioned perfectly. The digital evidence, the forged signature, the strict Delaware legal codes, everything aligned to build a wall my parents could not breach. I had secured my inheritance, my education, and my freedom. But the operation was not quite finished. Victor had neutralized the threat, but I needed to establish the final boundary. I needed to ensure they understood that the girl who spent her life shrinking into the background was dead. I adjusted the strap of my canvas backpack, feeling the solid weight of my encrypted drive resting against my side. I stepped forward, closing the distance between myself and the broken people who used to be my parents, ready to deliver the final checkmate. The air in the administrative building hung thick with the remnants of my mother's performance. Linda remained on her knees on the polished tile, her shoulders heaving, waiting for the familiar script to play out. Throughout my childhood, her tears served as the ultimate trump card. Whenever my father lost his temper, or my brother broke a rule, my mother would weep, forcing the rest of us to rush forward and soothe her anxieties. It was a mechanism of control disguised as fragility. I recalled a specific afternoon years ago when Kyle crashed his expensive first car into a neighbor's fence. Linda cried so hard, the neighbor dropped the police report and apologized to her. She expected the same dynamic to unfold here. She expected the quiet, compliant daughter to absorb the public shame, kneel beside her, and make the situation comfortable again. I did not bend down. I stepped closer, stopping just out of her reach. My posture remained straight, my hands relaxed at my sides. Greg watched me from his slumped position against the mahogany counter, his face a portrait of defeated arrogance. He looked at me as if seeing a stranger. In many ways, he was. The docile girl he thought he could liquidate had never truly existed. She was merely a firewall, a protective shell I wore to survive living under his roof. I looked down at Linda, then shifted my gaze to meet my father's hollow stare. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream or hurl petty insults. Shouting is an expression of powerlessness, a desperate attempt to force someone to listen. I already held all the leverage, and they were already listening. Every person in that room hung on my next breath. "You spent my whole life treating me like an afterthought," I said, allowing the words to resonate through the quiet space. "You structured our entire family around Kyle's successes and Kyle's failures. You poured your wealth into his delusions while asking me to shrink myself to fit the budget. You thought I was too quiet to notice the disparity. You assumed my silence meant I was blind, and you believed I was too weak to fight back when you finally decided to sacrifice my future to cover his bad debts." My father swallowed hard, his eyes dropping to the floor. He could not sustain the eye contact. "But Grandpa taught me better," I continued, my voice steady and unwavering. "He taught me how to read the fine print. He taught me that trust is not a birthright, it is a legally binding contract. When you tried to break that contract, you forgot that he left me the tools to defend myself. I did not just survive your theft, I documented it." I turned my back on my parents, severing the interaction with deliberate finality. I faced the director of financial aid. The university official stood rigid, processing the emotional weight of the scene he had just witnessed. He had spent the morning assuming he was dealing with a concerned father managing a troubled student. Now he understood he was standing feet away from an attempted federal crime. I offered him a polite professional nod. "I believe we have some minor administrative paperwork to sort out," I said, echoing the exact lie my father had used in the car less than an hour ago. The director blinked, recovering his professional composure. He offered a small, respectful smile, his demeanor shifting from bureaucratic detachment to genuine admiration. He reached into the manila folder he carried and produced a small plastic rectangle alongside a silver lanyard. He extended his hand across the counter. "Your enrollment is fully reinstated, Ms. Montgomery," the director stated clearly. "Here's your valid student identification card and the keys to your residential hall. The housing department has secured your original room assignment." I reached out and took the items. The plastic card felt solid and cool against my fingertips. The metal keys clinked softly as I grasped them. These were not just dorm keys. They were the physical manifestation of my independence. They represented a door my parents could never unlock. I slid the items into the front pocket of my jeans. I pivoted slightly to address Victor Caldwell. The seasoned estate attorney stood tall, his vintage briefcase securely latched, his eyes sharp and observant. He had executed his role with flawless precision, but the final parameters of the engagement belonged to me. "Victor," I said, adopting a formal, businesslike cadence, "please proceed with the permanent restraining order regarding all my financial and academic records. I want a comprehensive block placed on my files under the Privacy Act. Neither Greg nor Linda Montgomery are permitted to access my student portals, contact my professors, or request any billing information from this institution." Victor offered a single crisp nod. "The paperwork is already drafted, Marin. The injunction will become permanent before the end of the business day. They will be legally barred from your educational existence." I looked back at my father delivering the final terms of his surrender. "Listen to me carefully," I instructed, my tone dropping into a register of pure surgical warning. "You will walk out of this building and you will drive back to Wilmington. You will never contact me again. You will not call, you will not email, and you will not send Kyle to ask for a loan when his bank accounts are audited. If you ever attempt to reach out to me, to Kyle, or to the university for money again, Victor has my explicit permission to hand the unredacted evidence file directly to the district attorney." Greg flinched as if struck by a physical blow. The threat of the district attorney was the ultimate deterrent. It guaranteed his permanent compliance. He knew the digital metadata, the internet protocol routing logs, and the forged signature photos would lead straight to a federal indictment. His freedom was now entirely contingent on his silence. He opened his mouth perhaps to offer a hollow apology or to beg for a lesser sentence, but his voice failed him. He simply stared at me, a broken man trapped inside a prison built by his own greed. I bent down and picked up my worn canvas backpack from the floor. I swung it over my shoulder, feeling the familiar weight of my laptop and the encrypted flash drive resting against my spine. I did not look at them again. I turned toward the exit doors, walking at a steady, unhurried pace. The crowd of stunned strangers parted for me, stepping aside to create a clear path. The quiet murmurs of the observing parents and students faded into the background. I left my parents standing in the center of the bursar's office, utterly paralyzed, humiliated, and trapped in the ruins of their own making. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the bright, crisp campus air, leaving the shadows behind me. The sunlight filtering through my dormitory window carries the crisp edge of early autumn. Outside on the campus quad, students are tossing frisbees and hurrying toward their morning lectures. Inside my room, the only sound is the steady hum of a mini refrigerator and the soft clicking of my mechanical keyboard. I sit at my desk writing a new block of code for my network defense seminar. The space around me is small. The walls are painted a sterile cinder block white, and the furniture is standard issue laminate. Yet this cramped rectangular room feels larger than the sprawling suburban mansion I grew up in. The air in here is clean. It is untainted by the suffocating weight of conditional love and constant surveillance. I am finally breathing on my own terms. It has been 6 weeks since I walked out of the administrative building and left my parents paralyzed in the center of the bursar's office. I have maintained total silence since that morning. I blocked their phone numbers, intercepted their email addresses at the server level, and instructed the university security staff to deny them physical access to the campus. Victor Caldwell handled the remaining legal perimeter. He ensured the trust funds were fully migrated into a secure institutional account, managing my tuition and living stipends directly. My financial ecosystem is now a closed loop entirely inaccessible to external threats. While I have spent the last month building my academic foundation, my parents have spent it dismantling their lives. The 24-hour grace period I granted them did not save them from the consequences of their fraud. It merely dictated the venue of their destruction. Delaware is a state built on corporate integrity, and the social circles my father prized are fiercely protective of that reputation. Word of a federal banking freeze does not stay quiet for long. The regional manager who flagged the forged power of attorney shared the story with a colleague. That colleague mentioned it to a country club board member. Within a matter of days, the affluent Wilmington suburb was buzzing with rumors regarding Greg Montgomery and his attempted wire fraud. The social fallout was swift and merciless. My father's peers value pristine ledgers above all else. A man who attempts to defraud his own daughter to cover a bad debt is considered a fundamental liability. Greg's charity board seats were quietly revoked. His business associates stopped returning his phone calls, citing scheduling conflicts that somehow lasted forever. The polished prestige he spent decades cultivating evaporated into the crisp autumn air. Stripped of his local influence, Greg could no longer maintain the illusion of wealth. The federal hold on Kyle's bank accounts accelerated their financial ruin. With Kyle's assets frozen pending the fraud review, his venture capital creditors realized the promised angel investments were a mirage. They filed aggressive civil suits to recoup their losses. To keep their favored son out of a courtroom, Greg and Linda were forced to liquidate their own tangible assets. They broke the lease on their luxury sport utility vehicle, returning it to the dealership. 2 weeks ago, they listed the sprawling Wilmington house for sale. I heard through Victor that they sold the property well below market value to secure immediate liquidity. They packed up their curated lives and moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. The mahogany dining table where they sat and plotted my ruin is likely gathering dust in a cheap storage unit. Kyle faced a reality check he spent his entire life avoiding. Stripped of my father's endless financial bailouts and locked out of the banking system, my brother had to find a way to pay for his basic survival. The charismatic tech founder who wore tailored suede jackets and boasted about decentralized logistics is currently working a minimum wage job. A mutual acquaintance from high school texted me a photograph last week. The image showed Kyle standing behind the counter of a local electronics retail store wearing a polyester uniform polo shirt and a name tag. He looked exhausted and profoundly ordinary. The golden child was finally forced to pull his own weight in a world that did not care about his inflated ego. I deleted the photograph from my phone right after viewing it. I do not spend my evenings gloating over their misfortune. Tracking their downfall requires energy, and my energy is currently allocated to more productive pursuits. They are strangers to me now. They exist in a distant orbit far outside the gravitational pull of my new life. Studying cybersecurity has taught me a great deal about the architecture of protection. We spend hours learning how to build robust firewalls, deploy encryption protocols, and trace malicious software back to its source. We are taught to view a network as a precious resource that must be defended against relentless external attacks. But the most valuable lesson I have learned has nothing to do with digital code. True security is not just about passwords and routing logs. Security is the fundamental understanding of your own worth. It is the realization that your compliance is not mandatory, and your silence is not a commodity for toxic people to exploit. For 18 years, I thought staying quiet was a survival mechanism. I believed that if I shrank myself small enough, the people who were supposed to love me would eventually notice my value. I learned the hard way that shrinking yourself only makes it easier for predators to step on you. You construct a boundary not to punish the people on the outside, but to preserve the integrity of the person on the inside. My grandfather understood this concept when he drafted the estate documents. He knew that family ties do not guarantee loyalty. He built a legal mechanism to protect me when he could no longer do it himself. I simply took the tools he provided and activated the defense sequence. Now I sit in my dorm room, looking out at the sprawling green campus, knowing my future belongs entirely to me. My tuition is paid, my schedule is full, my mind is clear. I do not carry the burden of their expectations or the heavy weight of their secrets. If you are watching this, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever found yourself shrinking to fit into a room where you are not respected? Have you ever had to build a hard boundary to protect your future from the people who were supposed to love and protect you? The hardest part is not laying the bricks. The hardest part is walking away and refusing to look back when they realize they can no longer reach you. If this story resonated with you, please drop a comment below and share your own experience. Tell me about the moment you stopped accepting less than you deserved. Hit the like button and subscribe to Still Drama Stories so you never miss another narrative about finding your strength when the odds are stacked against you. The best revenge you can ever achieve does not involve shouting matches or dramatic confrontations. The best revenge is simply walking away into a successful, secure life, leaving your abusers to drown in the shallow waters of their own consequences. I close my laptop screen and reach across my desk. I pick up a heavy brass object, rolling it slowly between my fingertips. My grandfather's blue fountain pen rests perfectly in my hand. The deep indigo ink is safe. The legacy is secure. I place the pen down gently, resting it across the cover of my heavy cybersecurity textbook. The ink belongs to me now, and I am writing my own ending.
We build our homes with the finest materials available. We construct sprawling suburban houses with manicured lawns, polished mahogany dining tables, and heavy oak doors designed to keep the unpredictable world safely outside. In modern American culture, these homes are often viewed as the ultimate monuments to our success. Physical proof of our hard work, our upward mobility, and our secure place within the community. Yet when we look at the quiet tragedies unfolding behind these closed, heavy doors, we are forced to hold a mirror up to our own lives. In a society that frequently elevates individualism and material triumph to the highest pedestals, the definition of family can easily become warped. The home transitions from a sanctuary of unconditional support into a carefully curated theatrical stage. When we pull back the curtain on the betrayals we have witnessed where signatures are forged, futures are stolen, and quiet children are sacrificed to save the reckless ones, we uncover a profound spiritual sickness. True peace and happiness within a family are never built on a foundation of wealth, social standing, or hollow prestige. They must originate from the deep internal self-cultivation of the parents themselves. The most devastating disease infecting the modern family structure is the desperate white-knuckled clinging to the illusion of prestige. In the pursuit of maintaining a flawless public image, parents can lose sight of the sacred responsibility they hold. We see mothers and fathers willing to lie to manipulate legal documents and to completely destroy a daughter's future, all to preserve their standing at the local country club or to save face among their business partners. This is the tragedy of confusing a person's core inherent value with their outward projected image. When parents fall into this trap, the family ceases to be a haven. It becomes a performance. The children are no longer viewed as independent souls to be nurtured. They are reduced to props cast in a play designed solely to validate the parents' egos. The manicured lawn becomes a lie, and the mahogany table becomes an altar where the quietest, most diligent children are sacrificed to maintain an illusion. This performative existence inevitably breeds a toxic conditional love, creating a deep emotional distortion within the home. Within the traditional family structure, the roles of the golden child and the scapegoat do not emerge by accident. They are the direct result of a selfish, entangled form of affection. When parents differentiate their love based on what a child can provide, whether that provision is the false pride of a charismatic son or the financial extraction of a quiet daughter's trust fund, they are not practicing love. They are practicing commerce. They do not love the child for the sanctity of their being. They love the utility the child provides to the family's grand narrative. It is a love built on an invisible ledger, where one child's emotional and financial well-being is routinely stolen to subsidize the catastrophic failures of another. To break this generational cycle and secure a genuinely better life, parents must embark on a journey of internal repair founded on three crucial pillars. The first of these is wisdom. Parents must cultivate the profound clarity required to wake up from the American obsession with the material. We must realize that money country club memberships, elite zip codes, and the fleeting admiration of our neighbors are profoundly impermanent. They are vapor. They can vanish in a single afternoon of bad investments or exposed secrets. Clinging stubbornly to a fake empire through deceit and manipulation will only lead to self-destruction. It guarantees the loss of the only thing that actually matters, the authentic love and trust of our children. True wisdom is found in cherishing honesty and inner peace, firmly rejecting the temptation to view our children as financial instruments or convenient shields to hide our own parental shortcomings. This awakening paves the way for the second pillar: moral grounding. The ethics of parenthood are inextricably linked to selflessness and absolute fairness. When a mother and father conspire to cover up the monumental failures of a spoiled, entitled child by robbing a diligent child of her rightful autonomy, they do not just commit a financial crime. They shatter the most fundamental moral bedrock of the family. To cultivate true family morality is to learn how to love without calculation. It requires a relentless commitment to unconditional support, completely devoid of hidden ledgers or expected returns on investment. Most importantly, it demands the moral fortitude to never under any circumstances use the pain or the resources of one child to paper over the mistakes of another just to satisfy the parent's vanity. Ultimately, wisdom and morality must be enforced by the third pillar: courage. In a culture that dictates parents must constantly pave the road for their children, we have forgotten what true resilience looks like. Courage is not found in using the absolute authority of parenthood to manipulate silence or extort the more vulnerable members of the household. True principled courage requires the terrifying bravery to face our own failures and to allow our children to face theirs. Instead of utilizing every deceitful tactic available to cover up a massive debt caused by a golden child's arrogance, a courageous parent drops the facade. They let go of their own pride. They step back and allow their child to experience the natural consequences of their actions. It is only through facing the harsh, unshielded reality of cause and effect that a child can ever truly mature into a capable adult. Children are not assets to be plundered in times of financial desperation. They are not sparkling pieces of jewelry to be worn at social gatherings, to project an image of perfection to strangers who do not truly care about us. Before we attempt to mold, control, or redirect the lives of our children, we must first look inward and undertake the arduous work of repairing our own souls. These are the quiet, devastating, and ultimately liberating truths we explore here. If this reflection struck a chord with you, or if you have ever had to navigate the complex, shadowy expectations of your own family, please subscribe to Still Drama Stories. Join us as we continue to unravel the tangled threads of human relationships, uncovering the profound lessons hidden in the hardest moments of our lives. As the evening settles and the lights in the neighborhood flick on one by one, illuminating the identical perfect houses on the street, we are left to look at our own reflections in the window glass. We must ask ourselves what kind of legacy we are truly building behind our own closed doors. When the money is spent and the prestigious titles fade into memory, we are left only with the truth of how we treated the people who trusted us most. And sometimes, in the quietest hours of the night, one has to wonder if the people sleeping down the hall are dreaming of the family they have, or mourning the family they thought they knew.